I still go back to the repetitive nature of the noise, and that humans tend to pick that stuff up. It's like having a washing machine that ticks or something that's making consistent noise.
I'm going to keep doing this while you're talking.
Well, that is annoying. Let me file a claim in court.
Yes, well, speaking of which, my name is Stan Smith, so you can file it under that.
In Australia, right? Yeah.
On today's episode, we'll talk about the EU confronting the UK in their first WTO dispute since Brexit. We'll talk about New Jersey and some of their investment and how that's going to bring jobs and power as soon as wind turbines start getting erected there. We'll chat through some cybersecurity incidents that have happened with Nordex recently, continuing this scary trend of cyber attacks on utilities and their vendors. What about Siemens Gamesa, some noise implications for wind farms in Australia, and then we'll chat about energy bills and misinformation and how that might be negatively affecting, most certainly is negatively affecting renewable energy products. So before we get going, be sure to subscribe to Uptime Tech News, our weekly newsletter, where you'll get updates on this podcast and other news around the web, as well as Rosemary's YouTube channel, where she continues to put out great new content every single week. So first thing on the docket today, Alan, the EU is upset with the UK. Is that how you're interpreting this?
Yeah, they're really upset. The UK government, when they are offering to do offshore wind projects, are asking the bidders to tell how much content will be UK based in that offering. So they're not requiring anything specific in terms of UK content, but they're just asking. And the European Union doesn't like that, because essentially what's happening here is the UK government is choosing to select operators that have higher content from the United Kingdom, which makes total sense. The US is doing exactly the same thing. The problem is we're in the middle of this weird Brexit, EU, UK battle that's happening, and the EU is screaming foul about it. And what's about to happen? Who knows? But the little twist in this is, remember that the European Union and the UK are tied together on the island of Ireland. So Northern Ireland is part of the UK, and the rest of the island is Ireland, which is part of the EU. And right now there's no border, so you can drive across. But what happened as part of the EU kind of quasi-settlement was goods and services that came from the England, Wales, Scotland part had to go through a checkpoint, essentially, to get to Northern Ireland. So they've kind of installed a checkpoint there, and I'm not sure the UK is okay with that. So this is just adding more fuel to the fire, it sounds like. Rosemary, there's going to be more EU conflict, even inside of the EU, in terms of where the wind turbine components come from, right? Italy's going to want to have Italian components. The French are going to want to have French components. Why can't the UK have some UK components? Are we not going to have to figure that out pretty soon?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, Britain has split from the EU, so then, everyone hasn't got the incentives they used to have to play nice together. So no doubt there are other countries that are, trying to push their own country's agenda, and also, trying to resist other countries getting the advantage in manufacturing and jobs and all that sort of thing. But I think when you're still within the EU, it kind of all balances out, because the EU is careful to support projects in, the less well-off countries maybe, and it kind of, they spread the love around a bit more. But no love is getting spread from the EU to the UK anymore. And so I think that that's what this issue is over, that the UK doesn't necessarily want to make all the sacrifices that it was making before, because it's seeing all the pain and none of the benefit of the EU relationship. And that's, they felt that even before they split, right? Or at least, approximately, or about nearly exactly half of them did anyway. That's the reason why they wanted Brexit to get more control. So it's not a surprise really that they would start to do this kind of thing. But I mean, it sounds like they don't even have local content laws at this point. They're just, asking for our information. By the way, do you happen to be making stuff in the
Exactly.
UK? And, who says that they're actually doing anything with that information? I guess that's their point. And yeah, I don't know. The whole situation does have a slightly childish kind of vibe to it, but you can kind of see the point of the UK. Many countries have local content laws, and that's how you ensure that you benefit from this big industry. And yeah, I think the UK is building so much and, doing so much especially for offshore wind, like the projects that they've done, they were quite early movers, and all of that investment and kind of planning that they did has really benefited the whole industry around the world. They want some of the benefit flowing through to their economy, some of the skills being developed, some of the manufacturing, being done in their country, and see those economic benefits. So you can't really, you can definitely understand it. I don't think I can necessarily fault it. So yeah, I don't know. One of those interesting disputes.
Well, and does anyone have an idea of what the right percentage is? Like if a country's like, hey, we want 20% local content or 27%, like is there a benchmark? Like who says 20% is good enough, or that is obscenely too much or harmful? Like does anyone know what the line might be?
I don't know if there is a line, right? I assume 100% is 100% too much. Is that where the line is? Probably. For the UK's perspective, the UK offshore is like supposedly second in line to China in terms of installed wind capacity, which is crazy, right? So they've clearly have made wind energy part of their national security. So I think they're going to tell the EU just to shove off, right? I think that's what's likely to happen, because they do see themselves on an island, and with all the things that are happening right now, having energy security is going to be high on the list. And Rosemary, I don't think the EU, although they may complain, they may go to the WTO. I just don't see the UK budging on this at all.
Yeah, well, they haven't really done anything yet. They're just asking for information. It seems hard to believe that would be a violation of any kind of trade agreement. Right. So I'm sure that they will try and push up to the limit of what the rule is that they've signed up to, and the EU will try and argue that their interpretation has gone over the line, and they'll settle on something. I mean, they need a trade agreement. No one can really handle the energy transition with only technology that's been developed in their country by companies from their country and made in their country. So, I mean, it's not even in a country's self-interest to demand 100% local content. So, everyone's got to find that balance of getting some of the economic benefit without, hindering their progress in projects that they want to do. So, everyone's got to play nice, because
that's it.
They need each other. They'll sort it out.
Well, moving on back to New Jersey here in the United States, the New Jersey Economic Development Authority is estimating that there'll be $150 billion in private investment in the next 15 years. And so they're obviously very excited about, their local prospects. And they're estimating that many union construction jobs related to a monopile plant being built there is going to require, which will not require a college degree, is going to pay an average of $70,000 per year. So like we just discussed, benefits like that locally are really important. Alan, does this $150 billion number seem high or low, or right on the money to you?
Right. That's what I was wondering. Number. It's a big number. It was so big that I went and looked up what the GDP of New Jersey is, a gross domestic product of an individual state, because it just seemed like, man, that seems really high. So the gross domestic product of New Jersey is grand total of about $700 billion a year. That's a lot of money. So if you're talking about $150 billion over 15 years, that's $10 billion, roughly $10 billion a year. Let's round it around. So it's not that much. It's not that much in terms of the total GDP for the state, but it is significant. If anybody drops $150 billion on your front step, you'd be shocked. But that's kind of what's happening. So you see all these desperate groups come together to sort of get involved with wind energy all of a sudden, and some of these jobs, these union jobs, are paying really well. Like 70 grand to work at basically a steel plant making pilings. That's not a bad gig, because that's 70K, and I assume plus benefits, right? Medical, probably full medical, the whole thing. So realistically, it's like $100,000 job. That's not bad money without having a college degree. That's actually really good money, and it has a long lifespan to it. So you're probably going to be at that gig for 5 to 10 years. Yeah, and I think that sounds terrific. And Rosemary, you think this is actually going to continue from state to state to state, or do you see this sort of coalescing like we have seen in other countries, where it seems to be a real focus for like one area, but it's not broadly diverse?
I have seen a lot of plans like this, or projections like this in Australia. People are really keen to do it on the hydrogen economy, and how many jobs and how much money that's going to bring in. And I think that they're all plausible if they're taken in isolation, but when you add, like there's probably other states that have similar big numbers for their expectations for their offshore wind industry. When you add it all together, I think that you end up with more than the whole offshore wind industry is going to be globally, or especially for hydrogen. Like I see all these projects added up, and I'm like, there's just no chance that the world's going to be moving that much hydrogen around. So I think that that any one of them could happen that way, but I'll be highly surprised if every state's plans for their growth into an emerging green industry, if they can't all happen together, because that's just too much. So I think that that's important though, because a state makes this plan, like this is on the table, and if we move fast we can grab that, but if we move slowly, well there's plenty of other states that would really like those jobs there. And so yeah, it is I know in countries like Australia, and I think the US too, been kind of waiting on climate change action, trying to be the last mover to, benefit from cost reductions and technology improvements that other countries have paid the bill for. And I think that we're starting to see that that's not a smart strategy. If you want to, think about your economy in 10, 20 years time, you will have missed the boat, the literal boat, offshore installation boat in this case.
Right. Yes, you would.
Yeah, so I think people, even conservative governments, are now starting to realize, oh, okay, there's a lot of benefits to do with the energy transition as well as costs, and if we wait to be the last movers, then we'll only get costs and no benefits. So it's good to see these kind of plans and get people racing, competing to get these industries, and a bit of competition should make it go faster and cheaper, right? So I think it's a good thing.
Well, is this going to reflect a slowdown? Like obviously inflation and the global security woes. I mean, is this going to increase over time, Alan, or is this maybe going to shrink? I mean, are people going to be, whoever these people are who are going to pump $10 billion a year into New Jersey, are they nervous right now about inflation and the narrow margins and all this sort of stuff?
Yeah, I don't think so, because these projects seem to be rolling ahead at rapid speeds. If you look at New York and New Jersey alone, and I won't even throw Massachusetts into the mix right now, you do see a lot of activity, particularly New York, which we're close to. The capital region of New York is rapidly building a port. There's ports going on around New York City. So there is action already, which again, I think Rosemary's right about this, which is if you want to get into this 2,000, 3,000 wind turbine event that's about to happen off the East Coast, you got to get in early and you got to make the agreements early. And that's why you see a lot of action at the state level, but also their federal representatives. So the Congress people and the senators, U.S. senators, are getting involved directly in negotiations because they see so much cash flow and the potential for so many jobs. What happens in New York doesn't happen in Connecticut. Think of it that way. So they're trying to bring home the bacon for the constituents. And this is really interesting in New Jersey because New Jersey is a big union state, that you now see union participation in some of these renewable energy projects. I think that's interesting to see.
Nordex was hit with a cybersecurity incident, shut down all their IT systems, trying to contain the issue. They said they found it at a pretty early stage, but I guess they're still going to have to figure out, because as we've discussed with our previous tech guest, Byron Martin, he said these bad actors are in these systems for sometimes 6, 9, 12 months before they actually strike, kind of pull the switch. So, just like anything else, like when we talked about the Vestas breach, months ago, there was just new information coming out every week for what seemed like 6 weeks, Alan, something like that.
Oh yeah, at least, yeah. It was crazy. Went on for way too long. I agree.
Yeah. And of course, Enercon was partially impaired by a satellite outage in just February. So I don't know. I mean, Rosemary, are we at the point where we just go, yep, there's another one, like no big deal, like just par for the course? Or do you feel like this is going to get better?
Oh, I mean, it's clear by now that everybody needs a cybersecurity plan. I mean, it was clear before, but maybe, it gives a little bit more urgency. Every other, wind turbine manufacturer, anybody else that works in any kind of energy infrastructure, I would suggest, would be looking at this and saying, okay, it's only a matter of time before it happens to us. So, if I was in charge of it, I wouldn't just be looking at preventing any kind of attack, but also, trying to troubleshoot. Okay, so what's going to be the impact if this gets affected, and make sure that you've got redundancy. And I think resilience is definitely the name of the game for energy system moving forward, not just for cyber attacks, but for all sorts of things. I know we just had the latest federal budget in Australia. It came early because we've got an election coming up. Hopefully, they're waiting until the last possible second to call it, but they had almost no spending on anything to do with climate change or renewable energy. But one thing that they do have is resilience type stuff for the grid, and it's partly related to climate change. And the Australian government has been pretty reluctant to admit that all of our, increasingly common natural disasters are associated with it. But we have so many floods now, so many bushfires now. I mean, it's crazy how often it's happening. And so whether or not you believe that it's caused by climate change, it's clear that we need to be more resilient, because these towns that are, cut off time and time again from bushfires and from floods and from everything, they're like, we need solutions where, no matter what happens, we need electricity. And so, yeah, we're starting to see resilience is, a really, really big part of that. And I think that'll probably spread throughout the world. I know parts of the US also have problems with that. In California, a lot of their blackouts are caused by needing to preemptively shut down power lines because, it's a high fire risk day. And yeah, so we might be amongst the first countries to experience this kind of disturbance, but it's going to happen more and more around the world. So I think that everyone's going to have to learn how to be more resilient. You can't just control everything singly from one point. It's going to be more about distributed energy, more about microgrids or parts of the grid that can operate as an island, can operate without satellite connection. All that sort of stuff I think is going to become important for more reasons than just cybersecurity. So I think that'll be a big trend over the next decade.
Moving on, Siemens Gamesa is now producing their 115-meter long offshore wind blades. So this is going to go on their SG14 236DD, which is a 14 megawatt turbine with a fantastic name. Rotor diameter of 236 meters, which for you Americans is 774 feet. So wonderful conversion there. Alan, thank you for your notes. And I guess the interesting thing to note is that they're using their integral blade technology, which means there's no glued joints and they're cast in one piece, which seems pretty difficult. But I don't know, Rosemary, is that a big fan? Should we be making big fanfare about that, or is that kind of par for the course? Obviously, I know lots of different companies will sometimes announce this is our blank technology, or we use this method, and often it's maybe the same as every other company is doing. Or is this really something that's unique, especially at this size?
I don't know if it's unique, but it is their thing that they make in the one-shot infusion process. They make it in one piece. It's interesting to see that they're, it's still working for them even at this very long length. But it would be a huge change for them to all of a sudden start making a two-piece blade. They have no experience with that, and those glue joints are, immensely problematic. When you first start out, I mean, you continue to see problems in them from time to time. So you really do need a lot of expertise around quality control, and even in design as well. It's incredibly difficult to accurately model the thick glue joint. So for a long time, with turbine blades, there's a big difference between the stiffness, especially torsional stiffness, like how resistant it is to twisting. There's a big difference between the way that it's modeled and the way that it behaves in reality. So it would probably be more surprising if they had moved to a two-piece blade, because it would have really opened up hugest can of worms for them. And yeah, you wouldn't want to see a 115 meter long blade just peel apart out in the field. So yeah, it makes sense to me. They've done it this way.
So how do they do, Rosemary, how do they do this? Is there a male tool they're wrapping glass around, or what is the physics of this, or the setup, manufacturing setup to do this? Because you're talking about taking fiberglass all the way around the blade, right? There's no joint, so there must be fiberglass on the edges. So
I need to look it up. I haven't looked into this since I was doing my PhD thesis on wind turbine blade design. Okay. But at least back then, and I assume now, it's still infused. It's still a vacuum infusion, so they get the glass there, and then they suck resin through it under vacuum. So you start out with dry glass, and then the resin kind of seeps through, which is the same as everybody else does as well. Just that they've got a much more complicated geometry to try and do it to. They don't have any open mold. And then I think that they have actually, and this I might be wrong, so I should check before I say it on the podcast, but I think that they have some sort of inflatable internal mold that will give them the inside surface. Okay. Yeah, that's how I think they do it.
So it's like a sorry, I don't want to. Is it like a B stage? So you still have to make two halves, right? I mean, they still have to lay glass material down, a balsa or whatever else, foam down on each half, and then they bring it together. I haven't seen this process worked out. I've only heard about it, read about it, never seen any pictures of how it's actually produced. I assume that's probably highly secret, I'm guessing, but 115 meters is a very long blade. It's not something easy to do. We have done similar things in aerospace. So we talked about making wings that way, but it's not the easiest engineering approach.
No, it's not. I mean, there's definitely benefit. You can imagine, obviously, that you would like to have your final blade come out with no joints in it. So you can see the benefit, and the challenges. You're right. They're secretive. They used to be a bit less secretive a while ago. So I think if listeners are interested to check it out, try and search some of the older stuff from in the 2000s before about 2010. I would suggest there was still quite some information available about how they achieved their process. And you can find some sorts of general information on their website. But all these manufacturers used to do open days at their factories. And in fact, the first year that I was living in Denmark, they had open days, and I didn't go because they were in the summer holidays in Denmark, and I took that opportunity to go travel around Europe. So I didn't go, assuming I would go the next year, and then they just all at once cancelled, and I couldn't even, like when my dad came to visit, I couldn't even take him to the factory to show him, how it worked. Oh, really? So, yeah, they're so secretive. I mean, you can't even get suppliers in there if they don't, really need to know. So it's a shame that the industry is so secretive. It is kind of silly anyway, because I mean, every colleague you work with, they're like, oh yeah, I work at LM now, and I used to work at Vestas, and before that I worked at Siemens. And,
right.
Everybody's worked everywhere, and everyone acknowledges that it's great to get employees that have worked at these other companies, but no one wants their information to go to the other companies. But of course they do. You can't tie someone down. You can only keep them for, maybe a year after you finish up. They can stop you working for a competitor. But in Denmark, they have to pay you half your salary while they're stopping you from working for someone else. So that used to be a common strategy that people would people would plan a big house renovation and they'd take a year off to build a house or renovate a house on their half half salary that they're getting paid out from their previous company, and then when they finish that, then they're free to go work for the next wind energy company. So that was
that's interesting
that's how
strategy.
they organize it,
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Nice if you can get it. But I think that the industry as a whole benefits from this knowledge sharing, and everyone kind of knows that. So I just wish that we would, be a little bit less secretive about, some of the just major things that the information is just out there anyway. Like, how does this one-shot infusion process look like now with the long blades? But,
right.
They won't change.
Well, moving on to Australia, our land of gigantic, terrifying spiders. There's been a wind farm in Victoria that is going to have to pay damages and curb their night noise because the judge has upheld that it was a major nuisance to local residences. Rosemary, do you feel like this is like we continue to report a little bit about some of these legal battles, and most of them seem pretty modest, like one person, another person here. Sometimes they're dismissed, sometimes the plaintiffs win. But what's your take here on some of the operational noise limits here? I mean, are they going to get better? Are they going to stay the same? Are people just going to have to learn to kind of deal with this and coexist? I mean, what do you see going forward with noise?
This is a really weird case because in this one, there is a noise limit that was set in the planning approvals, and the wind farm demonstrated that they met those requirements, at least for the most part. But then some residents were still bothered by the noise and launched legal proceedings. And so then it seems that the wind farm was judged to a different standard other than the one that they thought that they were signing up for with their planning. So that's a complicated situation, because I have always thought that the issue of noise from wind farms, it is so crazy that it became such an intractable issue, because you can measure noise. All you need to do is figure out what is an acceptable amount of noise to have in a person's a neighbor's home, and then require the wind farm to stay under that noise. If someone thinks there's a breach, you can go out and measure it. It's very easy. It's objective. I never understood why there was so much trouble to, find solutions to this problem. You set a noise limit and the wind farm keeps to it. And if they haven't, then, they need to take action to either, have less noise, or, sometimes they will install double glazing in a home or something so that they can reduce the noise in the home, and everyone ends up reasonably happy. But in this case, I think that they thought that they were doing the right thing. There was a noise limit in their planning approval. They met it. People complained. They went out and checked out whether it was true that the noise was being exceeded. Turned out it wasn't. I think that there were originally quite a few members of the community that were annoyed by the noise, and the wind farm was able to find a resolution with nearly everybody, but just not these two people. And then the finding that that they had broken some different rule than what they knew that they were subject to. That's a bit weird, and that would be making other wind farms around Australia a bit nervous that, like the goalposts seem to have shifted, like you don't know where the goalposts are anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's the really weird thing about this case.
I still go back to the repetitive nature of the noise, and that humans tend to pick that stuff up. It's like having a washing machine that ticks, or something that's making consistent noise.
I'm going to keep doing this while you're talking.
Well, that is annoying. Let me file a claim in court.
Yes,
well, speaking of which, my name is Stan Smith, so you can file it under that.
In Australia, right? Yeah. Well, that's just the thing. I'm learning more about aerodynamics on wind turbine blades lately. So one of the things that comes up is how much noise, and why is there so much noise there, and are there things we can do about it? And there are a number. You see many small companies pop up about reducing noise, and if that's something that needs to get addressed, we better get on it now, as we're going to expand wind energy, or having some way to deal with it. Double pane glass windows, I'm sure would help to some level, but again, it's just it seems like the wind industry just keeps saying, well, we meet this threshold, but the population base is saying, well, that's not enough. So it sounds like there's an engineering problem in there somewhere that somebody needs to get on and fix. That's what I see happening right now. We just have not a way to fix it yet.
People are working on it, but there's always going to be noise. You could have noise at whatever level you want. Basically, you slow it down, then you get less noise. It's the speed of the tip moving through the air. You can change the shape, and you can add trailing edge serrations. Based on the design, similar to how an owl's feathers kind of look. Okay. You can do all of those sorts of things and reduce the noise, but you always, when you're an engineer, you're designing to the limit. You want the most efficiency you can get, and you want the cheapest blade that you can get. So you're basically going for high performance, and one of your constraints is noise. And so if people raised the noise limit, then you would have slightly cheaper or cheaper cost of energy, so either cheaper blade or better performance. And if they lower the noise limit, then you'll see a little cut. So I don't see this as an engineering problem, because engineering has solutions, and we'll keep on getting better, I'm sure, but it's not going to be engineering that solves this. It's going to be politics. It's going to be making laws and sticking to them. Yeah. Set the limit where the limit should be, and engineers will design up to that. That's always how it's going to be. And so when you've set a limit and then you come back and say, no, actually, the limit, there is no limit. It's just whatever we feel. That's something that an engineer can't deal with. Like my engineering brain just about explodes when I hear this idea that an engineer is supposed to be responsible for whether somebody's annoyed by a noise, and that's a different decibel limit to what somebody else is annoyed. Like the local council needs to set the rules in the planning permit. How noisy can this be? And all of the engineers will deal with that just fine, no matter what the limit is. We'll cope. But the limit needs to be set and then stuck to.
So let me ask you about how ping plays into this. The ping acoustic sensor, right? That you just stick onto the side of the turbine. So one of the things I think it comes up is if I'm in, let's just pick Kansas. If I'm in Kansas, how much monitoring of those wind turbines are there? I mean, you can go out and sample them. It's not hard to do, but most likely the sampling is going to happen in the daytime, right? Having some sort of continuous monitoring out there to see what the noise really is, I think is important, because the biggest complaint about wind energy, besides the little shadowing effect, and I think that's probably fixable, is the noise. But we really do not have a constant monitor on the noise that a concerned neighbor could point to, because that's day and night, like a day and night monitoring system. There isn't one besides ping right now about what the noise is. And they may be totally right. Like there's some weird thing happening at nighttime and it's noisier, but we just don't measure it like that, I don't think. So I think that it's just like Dan and I had talked to the guys at Technostrobe about the lights. That now the requirements in the United States about the lights only coming on when there's an airplane that's near. Well, I think that makes sense, because the flashing lights is a big problem. People complain about that. I think the same thing on the wind side is that if we could have really active monitoring, then we would know. And I think then you have a much better argument. Yeah, everything's still working fine. The noise is not that loud. It's okay. Or maybe the ping monitoring is saying that the noise is too loud, and maybe the neighbor is correct. If it's right without any data, then you're going to leave it to the lawyers. And I don't want to leave it to the lawyers. I'd rather have the data, and let's keep this in the engineering realm.
Well, my question is, who decides that this number is okay? Like, you make a wind farm down the street from me. I already lived here, and you're like, no, don't worry, Dan. It's only going to be 45 decibels. That's the limit. That's the limit that we've set. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't make that limit. I also have not experienced your wind turbines yet. So I guess we'll wait and see. And then they start going, and you're like, hey, guess what? I hate your limit. I realize that it's legal, but I hate it, and my life is terrible now. I don't know. I feel like that's kind of where we're at with this story, right? Am I missing something?
Yeah, but the
like,
wind farm
who decides the limit?
Not the wind farm. The wind farm doesn't set the limit. Whoever is approving, giving the planning approval, they set the limit, and that should be based on.
Yeah, and where are they getting?
In theory,
this
they
number?
should be, elected people that are, driving that process, and you should be able to vote for that. So it should come from people, but that's the problem that I see is in the planning process. It hasn't, reflected community sentiment, or you've got a couple of people who are just always going to be annoyed and they've managed to, to win a case that they shouldn't have. Those are the two possibilities, but it shouldn't have that.
Well, it's all
much to do with
theoretical, isn't it?
engineering.
They're just saying that 40 decibels or whatever should be fine. It's like we should make a camp, and the people that make these policies should have to go live in the camp with the wind turbines right next to them, and like experiment. Here's what it sounds like. Oh, this is terrible. We should change our policies. Yeah,
but this isn't wind farm isn't the first thing that makes noise that people have to deal with in their environment. So these numbers aren't just plucked out of the air, applying only to wind turbines. It's it should at least be the same noise level that they're using to, locate new roads, new highways. Because, like sometimes they put up a highway and they put up the noise barriers.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
It's not, we shouldn't be reinventing the wheel here in this situation. And for a long time, people were, really upset about infrasound because they said that it had, some health effect that was unrelated to the decibels. And that was a harder challenge to solve because you can't measure what they are complaining about. But when it's just noise and decibels, we've got a long history of urban planning where people are bothered by noise and, you've got to balance development against residents' enjoyment. And I just don't see why it's so different when it applies to a wind turbine than when it applies to any other noisy activity that happens in a residential area.
Because it's like King Kong in your backyard, right? Because you can see it. Right. It's one of those things you can see it. You can know where the noise is. If a rando truck goes by, you don't know that guy is driving the truck. It's a one-off event. But that wind turbine isn't going anywhere. And I think that's
always there.
One of the issues. It's always there. I think it's an issue for the industry that they're going to, as an overall industry objective, is try to figure this out a little bit, because it's only going to get worse. And not doing anything about it is not going to help tamper it down. I mean, I think the argument is, well, there's always going to be people who complain. That's fact check true. I agree. There always will be people who complain about that. The question is, there's some people in the middle there that are just telling you what they hear. And I think that's fair. Can we try to address that? And maybe we can, but without having some way of monitoring. I don't know how real it is, right? I think that's the part I worry about.
I think you're right. And I think that they definitely haven't done like best practice community engagement in this case. Because I know, this is a huge topic in Australia, probably elsewhere around the world at the moment. But I know now, when a wind farm developer wants to develop a project, and they bring the community on board better. And part of that would be saying, these are what the noise levels are expected to be. This is, like a similar noise that you're, it's like standing 100 meters away from a highway, or, whatever. They'll give some comparison. And then they'll tell you what to do if you think that it's exceeded that, and what the process is, so people know ahead of time, what they can do if they do have a problem with how it sounds in the end. And usually they're doing a lot more proactive stuff to, like I said, if you get somebody who's particularly sensitive to noise, and they will help you to install some, noise reduction stuff in your home. I think that's the right way to do it. So I'm sure that the developers here would love to go back in time and, do this differently to avoid this. But at some point you could always have somebody that nothing was enough to, make them happy. Mm-hmm. And so I do think you need to get the legal precedent right, as well as, do a better job of community involvement.
I think the developers need to take like a Walmart sort of approach. Like, they have the greeters, like the old people that just sort of don't really do much, but they know that they have a crime deterrent effect. You just you covertly get like a team of like 10 grandmothers, and they just bake pies for all the people in the area who might be affected by the noise. And they just keep coming by every week with just a different, here's a cherry pie. And they maybe have like a, developer embroidered sweater, and just real casual, real subliminal, take care of the people, feed them well, and then they won't complain.
Yeah.
Good plan.
Pie solves everything.
Thank you. What doesn't pie solve? That's the bigger question. So moving on, last topic for today, misinformation, and this is making some headlines. Misinformation has been derailing some energy projects and some interesting research from Josh Fergan, who's with the University of Minnesota Duluth, says that Facebook, which is not a big surprise to any of us, is one of the biggest drivers of misleading content about renewable energy. Alan, is this a surprise to you? And I mean, are we going to continue to see projects get derailed, or just a lack of support? Or what's the implication here from the misinformation campaigns that we see on the web?
So when NPR, which is owned by the federal government, starts to complain about misinformation, you just kind of have to chuckle a little bit, because they have participated in misinformation also. If we're going to describe misinformation as being untruths, or maybe your political stance on something, fine. But it does seem weird that NPR is coming after some guy in Ohio as saying, well, he's the source of misinformation. Like, everybody has an opinion, and why can't people have opinions? And if they want to have a Facebook post about their opinions, so be it. And I don't have a problem with people complaining about wind industry or complaining about whatever, the local pizza shop. Sure, right? That's what Yelp is all about, and some of those other services that we use. They're the same. They're the same thing. And if we get all bent out of shape because some guy in Ohio disagrees with wind energy, we have to have ways of dealing with it. Calling it misinformation, to me, is the lowest form of dealing with it. The better way to try to address it is to try to build a consensus, right? That's the way things done. And you're always going to have 25% of Americans disagree with whatever proposal you put out there. So to say that there's some small group is disagreeing with you, that should be normal. If we didn't, we'd be living in some weird communist state, right? I mean, that's political elections in some countries where there's 99% approval. That's crazy. If you get 60% approval in the United States on anything, you're doing extremely well. So why worry about this part of it? I'm just confused here as to why NPR wants to step in on this. It's odd, I think. And Rosemary, I know you have more of a love-hate relationship with Facebook than I do. I rarely use Facebook, but how is Facebook in the middle of this thing right now?
Well, I used to rarely use Facebook, but I recently got banned from all Meta companies that I was involved with. Got banned from Facebook, from Instagram, from WhatsApp for no reason, and it's impossible to find out why, because they don't have
that
any.
Seems right to me. You're a monster. That seems right.
I hadn't posted on Facebook.
I feel like Facebook nailed this one.
I hadn't posted on Facebook or Instagram in months. I use WhatsApp to message my sister and my boyfriend, and literally nobody else. So it was a bit of a shock to hear that I'd apparently received they'd received dozens of complaints on my case, and they wouldn't be showing them to me or giving me any recourse to appeal. But yeah, so a love-hate relationship is the wrong way. I never loved it. I used to tolerate it, and now I'm not even allowed to tolerate it anymore. So I guess it's just pure hate. But I will say that there's a difference between opinion and misinformation, and we've seen it a lot. We've got some pretty colourful politicians in Australia who are anti-renewables. Yeah. And one of them posts a lot of it's misinformation. It is, they will say, they'll post a picture of an open cut mine and say, this is what it means to have a clean energy transition. Like, it'll just change what they say that mine is for. But, maybe they think it's a lithium mine, or maybe they think that it's, mining, I don't know, whatever they think wind turbine blades are made out of. And there was one particular case recently where it was a diamond mine. And, this went viral all over Facebook, this mine that people were attributing to clean energy. That's just clearly wrong. And you see lots of examples like that. And maybe, I don't know, maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't. But I do see a lot of people who are concerned about the environment that are way too concerned about the mining for renewable energy. And so they say we can't, maybe we shouldn't have the energy transition. But it's not, they never show, a coal mine. Obviously, you're mining for coal constantly. then that's like a more of a gray area. It's, it's not misinformation to say that you need to, mine to get materials to make any product, whether it's a clean energy product or not. But it does really change public perception. And I do know people who've had their opinion changed about, whether the energy transition is good for the environment or bad. People are starting to think that, the balance is that we shouldn't be, making any more wind turbines if we're going to put blades in landfill. And it's like, well, where do you think that coal comes from, and oil and gas, and where do you think it goes afterwards? It's a challenge,
right.
And I do think it matters because it changes public perception.
Is this the result, though, of not having independent news sources that are really doing news? And do you think this sort of what I call fact-checking organizations add anything to this conversation? I think they have just been, in the United States, have been discarded because they have a point of view just like everybody else does. And it's getting to a point now where nobody trusts anybody else.
Yeah.
That's where we're at right now. And I think it's a result of COVID. I think it's a result of some of the administrations that's going on. It's sort of watching the previous election in the United States and what we were told and what we're now told. So all those things lead into you can't trust anybody. So if you're really trying to persuade, then you need to persuade. I think throwing facts at people is not helpful. If we just keep doing that, we're going nowhere. If you really want to make an argument, and then you need to think about how, like an advertising agency would do it, and how you would try to persuade people to come to your side, knowing full well that you're not going to get 100%. I think that's where we should draw the line at, is we have some sense of balance here, that if I get 60% or 51 or 54%, that's plenty. That's all I need. And then I can work on the others, but I'm never going to get to 100. And to think that you are, I think, is a irrational perception of the human condition. And maybe we should let some of this stuff go, because I think in this particular case, well, in this particular case, NPR is the wrong place to do this. If Facebook wants to squash it, I guess that they can, but Facebook didn't squash it. Like, Facebook came back and said, it's not so outrageous that people disagree. We're going to leave it, which I think is unusual for Facebook to do. But I just don't get all worked up. I think we should tamper down. We have to have all the facts, and only one side has facts here. That's not the case.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't think there's so much you can do about, just your average guy on the street posting something that's not,
right,
giving the full nuanced picture. But I do have a problem with politicians doing it. I think that, I don't know, maybe it needs to be part of the, political advertising laws. It needs to include social media, because, I know in Australia that when you're in an election campaign, there's no truth in advertising if it's related to, political advertising. Normally, like, if you're a product and you say, right, my product can do X, and that's not true, then, there is a regulatory body that can fine you for false advertising. We don't have that for politicians.
Okay, that's crazy. And
it's kind of weird. And because they're so influential. So I think you could start there,
sure,
regulating what politicians, especially, these problem ones in Australia, they're actually members of parliament. So, there should be some sort of code of conduct that they have to live up to that includes not, blatantly lying to people on social media.
Well, okay. So Dan lives in Washington, D.C., right?
Yeah.
Dan lives in the heart of politicians, like, in the weirdest place on the planet, probably, in terms of politicians. But what are politicians good at? And what did they become good at? Messaging and persuasion. That's exactly what they're good at. Otherwise, they wouldn't get elected, because they do spout a lot of nonsense. But somehow we tend to reelect these people, right? And every 2 or 4 or 6 years, depending on how, what the election is, then we have this level of persuasion going on the whole time. And we're shocked that somebody gets elected when they've just been telling mistruths. Okay. All right, right. But be better. Right? I think the answer is to be better than what you're up against.
Well, and my last point here is just that there's a difference between, and I think this is what you're both talking about as well. Disinformation versus misinformation. So disinformation is like
Yep.
taking a photo of a Scrabble board and saying that Scrabble causes cancer. Or, there's something else that is just like, well, I heard that my neighbor played Scrabble every day and he broke his leg. So I think these are linked. I think these are linked, that Scrabble might weaken your bones over time. I don't know. So there's a difference between just like a hearsay story that's not really true, and then like I made this up to be blatantly false, like Rosemary's example about the mines. Like, here's a photo of a mine that has nothing to do with the actual topic that I'm explaining, and it's, I don't know. It's definitely complicated. I think both of you raised a lot of really good points. That it's hard to regulate. Like, who's to say that this was blatantly deceptive, or this was just an anecdote that kind of ran away. I had a friend who was we were talking about wind energy the other day. He's very conservative, and he's like, yeah, they're the least, wind turbines are the least reliable. You saw what happened in Texas. Like, they caused that whole thing. I'm like, they only accounted for like 10% of the power. Like, what's wrong with you? Like, he even knew that fact. I'm like, yeah, it was bizarre. But yeah, I don't think misinformation, disinformation is going anywhere, unfortunately.
No.
So last topic for today. This, unfortunately, is going to be my last podcast episode here on Uptime. I am moving on to some of my other endeavors that have been on in the background. So if you Google my name, you'll find various non-wind turbine things, such as my baseball content, softball content. I speak, and I've just finished my third book this past year. So I'll be leaving. So you'll miss I tried to fit in. Rosemary was hoping I'd get to at least, 3 King Kong references today? I got to 1, maybe?
1 and a spider one that was not
a weak spider one, I know.
Strong,
but I got a grandma pie reference in there. Does that count for something? Maybe?
Yes, it does.
Thank you. I appreciate that. But I've really enjoyed my time on the show, obviously being with you two, who are great minds, and you both have such unique and interesting and diverse, sometimes divergent, sometimes convergent perspectives, which has been really fascinating. And I've been really grateful to be between the dialogue of both of you. So thank you both. And for all of you listening, I appreciate you inviting me into your airways, into your homes, into your cars for these past 108, Alan, is it? Episodes?
Yeah, 108. Yeah.